They say you can't choose your family. That's a lie. My mother chose hers. She chose a balding, 2-bit con artist named Mark over her own daughter. The day he put his hands on me wasn't the day I lost my family. It was just the day I stopped pretending I had one. He broke my body that afternoon, but my mother, she shattered what was left of my soul with just 8 words. And in that silence, and the ringing of my ears, and the coppery taste of blood in my mouth, I promised them a special kind of justice. Not the kind you find in a courtroom, but the older, darker kind. The kind that leaves scars on your soul. Stick around, and I'll tell you exactly how I made them pay. You won't believe what they saw in me, and it started, as these things often do, with a slow creeping rot. My real father died when I was 10. He was a quiet man, a historian obsessed with local folklore and forgotten histories. He left me his books and a small trust fund he meticulously built, instructing it was only to be touched for my education or a house deposit. He left my mother the house, his pension, and a life of relative comfort. For a few years, it was just us. Quiet but stable. Then came Mark. He swept into our lives like a discount store Prince Charming. He was all toothy grins, cheap cologne, and grand promises. He told my mother she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, that she deserved the world. And my mother, who had been lonely for so long, drank it all in. I was 16 when they married, and I tried to be happy for her. I really did, but I saw things she refused to. The way his eyes would linger on a price tag just a little too long. The way he'd talk about his big projects that were always just about to pay off, but never did. He was a financial sinkhole dressed in a polo shirt. He convinced my mom to refinance the house my dad had paid off, for a surefire investment in a timeshare scheme that collapsed 6 months later. Suddenly, the quiet stability my dad had left us was gone, replaced by the constant low-level hum of financial anxiety. The tension in the house became a physical thing. It clung to the curtains and settled in the corners like dust. Mark's charm began to curdle when he wasn't getting his way. The favoritism was blatant. If I bought my mom a simple birthday gift with money from my part-time job, it was sweet. If Mark bought her cheap jewelry on her credit card, he was the most thoughtful man alive. The first real crack appeared over my grandmother's locket. My dad had given it to her, and she had given it to me on my 18th birthday. It was a simple silver locket, but inside, instead of a space for a picture, it was filled with a dark, polished stone obsidian, my dad had told me once. It keeps bad energy away, he'd said with a wink. One evening, Mark was complaining about another deal gone bad. He needed a few $100s to tide him over. I saw his eyes land on the locket around my neck. That thing's probably worth a bit, he said, his voice casual. Too casual. Silver, right? Maybe even an antique? I clutched it instinctively. It's not for sale. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Alara, my mother sighed from the kitchen. He's just making an observation. We could just take it to a pawn shop, Mark pressed on, ignoring her. Get it back next week when my money comes through. No, I said, my voice colder than I intended. It was a gift from Nana. Mark's smile vanished. Don't you take that tone with me in this house. It's my house too, I shot back. Dad left it to both of us. The slap was so fast I didn't see it coming. My head snapped to the side, my cheek stinging. I looked at my mother, my eyes wide with shock, pleading for her to say something, to do something. She just looked down, wiping the counter with a cloth. Mark, don't, she said, her voice weak, devoid of any conviction. Alara, apologize. You know how stressed he is? I didn't apologize. I just went to my room, the cold obsidian of the locket pressed against my burning skin. That night, I understood. I was not a daughter in this house. I was an obstacle. an asset to be liquidated, and the rot was spreading much faster than I'd thought. 2 years passed. I turned 20. I worked full-time at a local library and took online classes, slowly building a life for myself outside the four suffocating walls of that house. I had my own savings, a perfect credit score, and a plan to use my dad's trust fund for a down payment on a small apartment far, far away. They knew about the trust, and they were getting desperate. Mark's projects had devolved into outright gambling. He'd lost thousands on bad stock picks and online poker. His credit was shot. My mother's was circling the drain right along with his. The final notices started appearing in the mail, their red lettering like little screams for help. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday. I came home from work, exhausted, to find both of them waiting for me at the kitchen table. Spread before them was a mountain of paperwork. Loan applications. "Elara, honey, sit down," my mom started, her voice unnaturally sweet. Mark took over, his tone oozing fake sincerity. "Look, kiddo, we're in a bit of a tight spot. A temporary cash flow problem, that's all. We have a great opportunity to consolidate everything, get a fresh start. But the bank, well, they need a little more security." He pushed a form towards me. "We need you to co-sign." I stared at the paper. It was for a $50,000 high-interest personal loan. Co-signing wouldn't just tie me to them financially. It would drain my dad's trust, my savings, my entire future. It was a financial suicide pact. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room like a grenade. My mother's face fell. "Elara, please." "It's for the family." "What family?" I asked, my voice shaking with the rage I had suppressed for years. "The family where you let him gamble away Dad's money? The family where you let him hit me and told me to apologize?" Mark's face went purple. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you, you've done nothing but take." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm." "The answer is no." That's when he lunged. He grabbed me by my hair and slammed me back into the chair. It wasn't a slap this time. It was a beating. He was a cornered animal, all flailing fists and snarled curses. I tasted blood, my vision blurred, and the world became a symphony of pain and his grunting efforts. I tried to fight back, but he was stronger, fueled by a desperate, pathetic rage. When he finally stopped, panting, I was slumped over the table, my body a constellation of fresh bruises. I slowly lifted my head, my one good eye focusing on my mother. She stood by the sink, her back to me, her hands gripping the edge so tight her knuckles were white. She hadn't moved. She hadn't said a word to stop him. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice a broken rasp. She turned around, her face not one of concern or horror, but of cold, hard annoyance. She looked at my split lip, my swelling eye, and the chaos around us. Then she uttered the 8 words that ended my childhood forever. "Don't act like you're the victim here." Something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. It turned into a cold, dark void. I looked from her empty face to Mark's triumphant, sneering one. They weren't my family. They were monsters wearing the skins of people I was supposed to love. My revenge began not with a lawyer, but with a box. A dusty cedarwood box from my dad's old study, which I'd claimed as my own. Inside were his most personal effects, old journals, research notes on local folklore, and books bound in cracked leather that smelled of vanilla and decay. My mother had always dismissed it as his morbid hobby. I was about to find out it was something much more. One book, in particular, caught my eye. It had no title on its spine. The pages were brittle, filled with my dad's frantic, scholarly handwriting. He wasn't just studying folklore. He was documenting it, cataloging rituals, describing entities, He wrote about a concept he called karmic resonance, or echoes of judgment. The theory was simple. Certain places, particularly old homes, can absorb the intense emotions and intentions of their inhabitants. A house built on love feels warm. A house filled with greed, betrayal, and violence, well, it can become a mirror. It can learn, and it can be taught to reflect those things back, amplified. The plan formed in the cold, dark corners of my mind. It would have two phases. First, the financial ruin they craved. Second, the psychological destruction they deserved. Phase 1 was almost insultingly easy. Mark was a sloppy con man. Using a burner laptop and public Wi-Fi, I started digging. I created a fake online profile, a wealthy, recently divorced woman looking to invest. I found Mark on a seedy investment forum and dangled the bait. I fed his ego, listened to his sob stories about his ungrateful stepdaughter, and made him believe I was his golden ticket. He fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I convinced him to pool all their remaining liquid assets, a few thousand he'd managed to scrounge up by taking out payday loans, into a can't-miss cryptocurrency scheme. The crypto wallet I had him send it to was, of course, mine. I watched the money transfer, and then I ghosted him. He lost everything in a single keystroke dot simultaneously. I started a whisper campaign. I found the online forums for the timeshare scam he'd originally roped my mother into. I anonymously posted everything I knew, names, dates, account details he'd foolishly left on our home computer. It was enough to restart a stalled class action lawsuit. Soon, lawyers were calling our house, not with offers of loans, but with subpoenas. The foreclosure notices on the house went from weekly to daily. Now for phase 2. The part my father's book was for, the book described how to attune a place. It wasn't about ghosts or demons in the traditional sense. It was about weaponizing the negative energy already there. The house already hummed with their greed, their lies, my pain. I just needed to give it a voice. The ritual was subtle. It required personal items. I took one of Mark's greasy ties, a clipping of my mother's hair from a brush, and a single tear I'd shed the night of the beating, which I had saved in a tiny vial. The book said the ritual needed a focal point, a heart for the house. I chose the crawl space under the floorboards in my room, right below where I had nursed my wounds. Following the cryptic instructions, I buried the items there, along with the obsidian from my locket, which the book described as an anchor for shadows. Then I just had to wait and watch. I became a ghost in my own home. I was quiet, compliant, and distant. They were too consumed by their financial ruin to notice the change in me, or the changes in the house. It started small. Mark began complaining about the smell of dirt, a damp, earthy smell that seemed to follow him from room to room. My mother kept hearing whispers, a faint sound like a child crying, that would stop the moment she tried to find it. They'd lose things, car keys, wallets, wedding rings, only for them to turn up in strange places, like inside the wall vents or buried in the garden. Their arguments grew more vicious. Mark accused my mother of hiding his things. She accused him of going crazy, screaming that the crying sound was driving her mad. One night, I heard a crash from their bedroom. I crept out to see Mark staring at their reflection in the wardrobe mirror, his face pale with terror. "Did you see that?" he stammered to my mother. "In the mirror. Our reflections." They were smiling. My mother just sobbed, pulling the blankets over her head. The house was learning. It was beginning to reflect their own ugly souls back at them. The final foreclosure notice arrived a week later. They had 30 days to vacate. Their panic was a feast for the house, and the hauntings escalated. The whispers became clear words, repeating their own lies back at them. The smell of damp earth in Mark's room began to smell like decay. They were breaking, and I was almost ready for the finale, The final night was a masterpiece of atmospheric horror. A storm was rolling in, the sky a bruised purple. The bank had taken possession. The eviction was tomorrow. Mark and my mother were in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, their faces illuminated by the frantic flashes of lightning. They weren't speaking. They were two strangers trapped in a sinking ship, their hatred for each other now a palpable force. That's when I performed the final step from my father's book. It wasn't a ritual of summoning. It was a ritual of release. I went down to the crawlspace, dug up the anchor, and whispered the words my father had transcribed. It was a simple instruction: show them. I walked back upstairs and stood at the top of the stairs, watching. The lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness, save for the strobing lightning. My mother screamed. Mark yelled at her to shut up. Then a new light began to glow from the walls. Not an electric light, but a sickly phosphorescent green, tracing the patterns in the wallpaper like veins. The air grew heavy and cold. The whispers they had been hearing were no longer whispers. They were a chorus, coming from every corner of the room. And they were speaking in my voice. Not my current voice, but my voice as a 16-year-old, the day Mark first hit me. Apologize, Alara. You know how stressed he is. The words echoed, distorted and mocking. My mother clapped her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with terror. For Mark, the manifestation was more personal. The earthy smell of decay intensified, and from the floorboards, black, muddy handprints began to rise, reaching for him. They weren't ghostly. They looked solid, like the hands of countless people he had cheated and scammed, crawling up from their financial graves. He scrambled backward, kicking at them, but they were everywhere, grasping at his ankles. It's just the damp. The pipes burst. He screamed, but his voice was thin with terror. Then came the final vision. The large mirror above the fireplace, the one my mother was so proud of, went black. Then an image faded in. It was the two of them, just as they were now, but their faces were monstrously twisted. Mark's was gaunt, his skin covered in sores, coins pouring from his screaming mouth. My mother's face was smooth and blank, with two black pits where her eyes should have been, the perfect reflection of her willful blindness. Their mirror selves turned to look at them, and they smiled. It was a smile of pure predatory malice. That's what broke them. My mother let out a wretched, animalistic shriek and bolted for the door, running out into the raging storm. Mark, tangled in the muddy hands that only he could see, crawled after her, sobbing like a child. They ran from the house. Their house. The house my father had built. The house that now belonged to the echoes of their own cruelty. I stood in the doorway and watched them disappear into the rain. Two broken people fleeing a prison of their own making. The aftermath was quiet. The house felt calm the next morning, the air clean. The bank took it, of course, and I didn't fight it. There were too many memories there, and I had no desire to live in a tomb, even when I had weaponized. I took my father's books, my trust fund, and I left. I never saw Mark or my mother again. I heard through the grapevine they ended up homeless, drifting from town to town, haunted by debt and, I imagine, by their own minds. They say Mark was eventually institutionalized, raving about hands in the walls. My mother simply vanished. Sometimes I take my father's book out. I read his notes, his theories on justice and the darkness that people create for themselves. He never intended for his research to be used as a weapon, I don't think. He was just a scholar. But he gave me the tools to survive. He gave me a way to balance the scales. They say blood is thicker than water. They never tell you what happens when the blood itself is poisoned. You learn to cut it out of you, whatever it takes. Or you teach it to poison them back. So let me ask you, what would you have done in this situation?